When I was about 12 years old, my mom decided to visit her aunt, who lived about 30 minutes outside of town in Alamosa, Colorado. We made the trip from Trinidad, and I'll never forget that house. It was one of those places that seemed ordinary at first glance, but the longer you stayed inside, the more it felt like the walls were keeping secrets. The sunroom was where I ended up. It was filled with life, plants of every size. I love plants, their leaves stretching toward the glass windows, vines winding up their pots. In the middle of it all, on a sunny afternoon, sat two twin beds. I lay down on one of them, just to rest, and before long, I slipped into what I thought was a dream. That's when I saw him. A little boy, maybe 8 years old, pale but clear as day, standing beside the bed. He didn't say a word. He just stepped closer and showed me something. It was a double picture frame, one photo stacked above the other. In the top frame was a woman in a red dress, her expression blank but piercing. In the bottom frame was a man in a suit, sharp and serious. The boy just held the frame there, staring at me, as if he needed me to know who these people were. I remember studying the faces, trying to figure out why he was showing them to me. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't look away. And then suddenly, I was awake. Except, the strange thing was, my eyes had apparently been open the entire time. My brother, who was 2 years younger than me, was sitting in a chair at the foot of the bed. He was staring at me with this uneasy look and asked, "Who are you talking to?" I sat up fast, confused, and told him about the boy. About the photos. My brother shook his head. He said there was nobody there. He said I had just been staring upward, whispering, like I was talking to something only I could see. That rattled me more than the dream itself. Later, the two of us went to find my mom's aunt. We told her exactly what had happened and asked straight out if there had ever been a little boy in that house. At first, she hesitated, almost like she didn't want to answer. Then she sighed and admitted that yes, there had been a boy. He had died young, right there in that house. I'll never forget the way she looked at me when I told her what I saw. She shook her head slowly and said she couldn't believe I had actually seen him. And that's what sticks with me after all these years. My brother saw nothing. But I saw a boy who wasn't supposed to be there. I spoke to him, though I don't remember what I said. And I can still picture that double frame in my mind, the woman in the red dress, the man in the suit, stacked one above the other, like silent witnesses. To this day, I don't know why he came to me. Was he showing me his parents? Was he trying to tell me something? Or was it just his way of letting me know that even though his life ended in that house, he never truly left? I lived in Waynesboro, Virginia, for about 5 years, less than 10 miles from the Blue Ridge Parkway's north entrance and the Skyline Drive south entrance. I rode my bike along Skyline Drive often, always during the day, never at night. But one sleepless evening, I made a choice I'll never repeat. It was close to 11 p.m. when I fired up my bike and rode up to the first overlook, only a mile inside the park. The moment I cut the engine, the silence and darkness closed in. I've always been comfortable in the dark. It usually feels like a shield, a kind of privacy. But this was different. The darkness here was heavy, suffocating, worse than anything I'd felt in the mountains before. I tried to brush it off. There's nothing up here besides wildlife, I told myself. I had my .44 Magnum on me, just like always, so there was no reason to feel unsafe. I leaned against the bike, looking down at the scattered lights in the valley, trying to relax. But after a few minutes, I felt it, that deep, unmistakable sense that I was being watched. I knew that feeling from my time in Iraq. It's not paranoia. It's instinct. The kind of thing that crawls up your spine right before something bad happens. The overlook dropped sheer into blackness, so nothing could come from that direction. But behind me, the mountain and the thick woods pressed in. I imagined all sorts of possibilities, bears, predators, even people creeping around where they didn't belong. The Appalachian Trail has seen its share of violence. Still, this was different. It wasn't just fear. It was presence. I sat on the stone wall facing the woods, refusing to give the darkness my back. I thought about turning on my bike's headlight, but that would only blind me to what lurked just beyond its reach. So I sat, waiting, until my nerves told me enough was enough. I started the engine and crept back down the road, keeping my speed slow. Wildlife on those roads can be dangerous, and I didn't want to wreck. The parkway was silent, no cars, no lights, no signs of anyone else. That's when I saw it. Two eyes reflected in the headlight long before the shape took form. At first I thought it was a deer, but the closer I got, the more wrong it seemed. Its head looked too broad, almost like a cow's, but it was fixed on a deer's body. Its legs were spindly, too long for its frame, and the chest was thick and barrel-like. It was the biggest deer I'd ever seen, but it wasn't right. Something in its proportions was twisted, unnatural. I stopped about 30 feet away. I flashed my lights, revved the engine, even honked the horn. Nothing. It just stood there, watching me. I climbed off the bike, keeping my revolver close, and shouted at it. No reaction. I took a few steps into the other lane, looking for a rock or branch to throw. And that's when it rose. On two legs. It stood upright, jerky and stiff, swaying unnaturally. I froze, every instinct screaming. It staggered forward 2 steps, then snapped its head violently side to side, like a dog tearing into a toy. Then it hopped, short, bounding jumps, unnatural for anything on 2 legs, until it disappeared into the dark. I scrambled back onto my bike, heart pounding, but before I could gun the engine, I caught sight of it again. On the far side of the road was a steep drop, at least 40 feet down. And there it was, its head just peeking over the edge, still watching me. No way it was standing at the bottom. I cracked the throttle and tore down that mountain road as fast as I could, wildlife be damned. I've never gone back to Skyline Drive at night alone. Once was enough. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't natural. It wasn't from around these here parts, in Hill Talk. It can go back to wherever it came from, and stay there. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, my family moved into a house in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The basement was unfinished, wide open, and cold, and that's where I shared a room with my 2 older brothers. It smelled of damp cement, and every sound, every creak, every pop of a house settling echoed through the space. For the life of me, I cannot remember the exact location or even what the outside of the house looked like. It all feels like a blur, except for one detail. After consulting with my older sister, I now know it was on Albert Drive. She, however, did not want to be dragged into this memory. The moment I brought it up, her voice changed. She reminded me of something else. Our grandmother had once played with a Ouija board, a makeshift one my sister had created out of cardboard when she was just a teenager. She said terrible, intrusive thoughts had come into her head after that, dark and demonic things, and she wanted nothing more to do with it. I could hear the unease in her tone when I pressed her, like she was afraid even remembering might invite something back. Being the youngest, I always went to bed before my brothers. The basement lights would flick off, and I'd curl under my thin blanket, staring into the heavy shadows that seemed to breathe with the silence. One night, not long after we had moved in, my mom tucked me in and went upstairs. I had only been lying there for a few minutes when I saw him. An old man. Standing just 3 feet from the end of my bed. He had a long, gray beard. He wore a black suit, stiff and formal, with a red flower pinned neatly on his lapel as though he had come from a funeral. His eyes didn't just look at me, they pressed into me, heavy and unyielding. The air in the basement thickened, like I was drowning in it. Then, slowly, with deliberate, shaking movement, he raised his arm. His finger stretched out toward me, bony and pale, and in a low, guttural voice, he commanded, "Get out, and get out now." My body locked up with fear. Then instinct took over. I yanked the blanket over my head and screamed into the darkness. The sound bounced off the basement walls, but when I dared to peek out, he was gone. The space was empty, but I could still feel the weight of him lingering. I bolted upstairs, heart pounding, where my mother met me halfway, her face pale with worry. I poured out what I had seen. My father dismissed it instantly as a bad dream, but my mother didn't. Her voice shook when she reminded him I hadn't been asleep. I had only just laid down. That was the last night I ever slept in that basement. My parents rearranged everything to make room for me upstairs, no matter how cramped it made the house. A few days later, my parents were visiting with a neighbor down the street. I tagged along, and while they talked, the neighbor pulled out an old photo album. I wasn't paying much attention at first, flipping lazily through page after page of strangers. But then, my eyes froze. There he was. The man from the basement. The beard, the flower, the suit, it was him, without a doubt. I pointed to the photo, my small hands shaking. The neighbor looked at me strangely, then told me the truth. The man in the picture was the former owner of the house. He had lived there for years, and he had died there, in that very basement. I never saw him again. But I never forgot. Years later, when the time finally came for us to move out, my parents hired movers to pack everything. One of them asked my mother what she wanted done with the belongings in the attic. My mom froze, her face drained of all color. She told him the attic door had been painted shut the entire time we had lived there. But the mover insisted it had been wide open. That night, we were supposed to sleep on the floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes, before leaving in the morning. But I overheard my mother whispering to my father. Her voice was sharp and final. She said she would not spend one more night in that house. Even now, more than 40 years later, the memory burns as clear as the night it happened. I've often wondered what the current occupants have seen, what they've heard in that basement or behind the painted attic door. I've wanted to reach out, to warn them. I can't risk stirring it back up, can't risk inviting it back into my life. I wish my sister would have never made that Ouija board.